Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Welcome back in, Basketball Conference, ACC football podcast. Season previews roll along here on Tuesday, August 6th. It's time to preview Florida State. James Coleman, friend of the show, former fullback for the Seminoles. He's from the Sports Den. He writes for Fifth Quarter. He's all over the place, throws a hell of a tailgate. It's been about 5 years since I was at that tailgate now, James. Hard to believe that was 5 years ago.
Bad luck, too.
I know. I was bad. I walked.
Actually, no, it actually worked out. Worked out for us.
It did. I was gonna say it was bad luck in the moment, but it worked out in the long run. I would say that was game one at the Taggart era. I was down there for Virginia Tech, Florida State, and Tallahassee. Listeners know the drill. Tech won that game. Both schools are on different coaches now for the better, I would argue, especially for Florida State with Mike Norvell. There's no doubt about it. After a 13-1 year last year. I hate even bringing up the 13-1, James, because that one loss feels just like it doesn't even matter. Like nobody really suited up. People on social media were making more out of it than they should have, which is no surprise. That's something that happens. Let's start here because we didn't have you on right after the season. I'm just curious. I saw some of your thoughts on social media, but I'm just curious in general of what you thought of Florida State being left out of the playoff last year, and I guess the implications on conference realignment, right? Because I think that's obviously one of the things that would most certainly be fueling, Florida State's eagerness to exit the ACC, we'll call it.
Well, it was obviously it all started before that, but it just nobody wants to be in a second-tier conference. Like, nobody wants to feel that way when you feel like you're a premier team. All trolls aside, there's outside of Ohio State, what is there? I think Florida State and Clemson are the only teams that are non-SEC related that have won anything of note. Really, if you go back to to this part, this really, So 2 and 3, actually, no, Clemson 3, Florida State with 2, and in this modern era. But it definitely didn't. It also hurts when the guy who sits on the board of the selection committee it represents the ACC. People on the selection committee have ties to the ACC. It just showed that it didn't even feel like there was a beating of the table to make sure you had, because it was unprecedented. And the rationale that everybody used is kind of flawed, but this is light. We don't want another TCU. Was the reason? Was the rationale?
Right.
Neglecting the fact that TCU beat Michigan in order to get to the national championship game, and I'm just of the effect that you earn. If they were going to get their butt whooped, they earned the opportunity to get their butt whooped. Right. Undefeated conference champion, and if you can't get in over a one-loss team, and when you're undefeated, this wasn't even TCU lost their conference championship game, probably shouldn't have got in, but. I think everybody, they put what I really feel, because Florida State talking a lot of trash last year. The goal was to have Georgia play Florida State. If Georgia wanted the SEC, that's the first round of the that they were going to make Florida State the 4th team in.
1,000%.
The thought was that this was going to be a butt whooping, but outside of trolling, and it was a butt whooping against Georgia in the Orange Bowl. But there's 13 current Florida State players from off that team trending to make the NFL roster, of which one of those guys played. Right. You can't lose 13 NFL. I don't care who you are. 13 NFL caliber players not being on your roster, that you're not going to win. You're not going to win very many ball games.
Oh yeah, people made more out of that than they should, and then we get into the playoff, and that Alabama Michigan game. Is obviously competitive, right? And they're all, everybody's out there saying, well, that's the reason why Florida State shouldn't have been in, is because we don't know if that game would have been competitive. I'm like, we're using a base case of a game that you didn't put them in as the reason why we're keeping them out, and we're using that TCU game from the year prior. as a reason why you keep it out. I mean, that part was crazy to me too, because TCU, I mean, going into that semifinal game 2 years ago, nobody thought that TCU was going to beat Michigan. A lot of people had Michigan penciled in the national title game. TCU goes in, they force a couple J.J. McCarthy turnovers, and all of a sudden the game totally flips on its head. Now, of course, you don't want that, you didn't want that TCU-Georgia national title game to happen again. I think that was a concern, but, like, that's totally subjective, Yeah, it's totally subjective. They just totally neglected the games that were played on the field.
It's like boxing. Like, you can always, but certain guys struggle with southpaws. Certain guys struggle with this. You have to. That's why you play the game,
right?
But I would say this: it was very terrible quarterback play in the national. Outside of actually, maybe the Texas game that was good. That was good quarterback play. But
yeah, right.
Definitely Penix didn't play well enough to get them into to win it. And to be honest with you, I'd argue Michigan didn't. The only reason they didn't blow Washington out was because they started to try to make McCarthy throw.
Yep.
They went back to running the ball. Things were pretty dominant. But what does Florida State do well last year outside of not having Jordan Travis? They gave up 3 passing touchdowns
right
up until the Georgia game. They actually played very good defense, and they ran the ball. So, like, I think whatever. Florida State fans had every right to be upset. But at the end of the day, it did happen. It'll be one of those. They'll be one of the favorite teams that Florida State fans have, those what ifs. And at the end of the day, we got to worry about 2024. You can't stay in that moment because you'll lose this season. But I think those guys do have a pretty heavy chip on their shoulder.
Agree. I mean, and it's one of those situations too. I mean, Jordan Travis doesn't break his leg. They're obviously in the playoff, right? No questions asked. So is what it is. We enter the 2024 season. Obviously, it's, I'd say a year with, expectations, which are still obviously very high. But I think expectations are also a little bit different in that, Florida State obviously graduates 2 outstanding receivers. That, Jordan Travis is gone. You bring in the portal DJ Uiagalelei from formerly of Clemson, of course, and then of Oregon State, right, which I think I nailed it, man. I nailed it. I've had a lot of practice.
I mean, even if you didn't say it right, it was the confidence in which you said it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, well, I've had a lot of practice, back when he was in the ACC. But he's back in the conference. He's now gracing the fields at Doak Campbell, and we'll see what that looks like. Basically, ever since leaving Clemson, I mean, he was pretty decent at Oregon State. Now he comes into a Florida State program, Mike Norvell, where I think he could certainly make some noise. And I don't think anybody expects him to be Jordan Travis, but I'm not sure he has to be either.
No.
So, I mean, what's your thought of him coming in as the Jordan Travis replacement? What do you think Florida State fans should expect, and what do you think reasonable expectations are considering what they're replacing a quarterback from a year ago?
I think one of my favorite things to talk about with DJU is his 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. He's had it in consecutive years. He had it at Clemson. He had it at Oregon State. Maybe that's what he is. And if he's that, and our defense plays the way that everybody expects it, we're going to be fine. We just need him to not turn the ball over. Actually, the 7 interceptions I believe he had last year, we knocked that down to 5 and gained those 2 touchdowns. He's done more than enough to be able to get us in the ACC championship. I think Jordan Travis' ability to extend plays and kind of maybe being in his head too much about not being a big quarterback probably limited him to just getting upfield sometimes. And I also think he ran a little bit too much. I'm going back and watching that Miami game, there were some big WTF moments in that game. Kudos to their DC for maybe frustrating them a little bit, but it's kind of like, dude, just get rid of the ball. There was no need to do what it is what you did. In particular, the play that should have been a safety. That was him scrambling. God knows, like, why are you doing that?
Right.
But I think DJU doesn't do that because he doesn't have the athleticism of J. Trav. But what he does know is he has a powerful arm. And what Florida State invested in this past offseason with Brown, with Benson, you already have Portier. You have guys that can run. And that's kind of where I think you'll see the offense a little bit more vertical when it comes to trying to take chances and take the top off of defenses. And probably a little bit more run heavy now because of the line additions and the running backs that you do have.
Well, yeah, I mean, you lose Trey Benson to the NFL, and I didn't mention this when I was talking about all of Florida State's playmakers who automatically go to quarterback and what they lost at receiver. But they lose Trey Benson out of the running back room. But you bring in Roydell Williams, who transfers over from Alabama. You have Lawrence Toafili still in the building. I mean, I feel like Mike Norvell, just based off of the press conference clippings I've seen out of camp, he does feel like this running back room is going to be a strength once again.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at even the guys that people aren't really familiar with, like your Sam Singletons, who's a track guy. You've got Makai Danzy from my high school. He's a 400-meter guy. Actually, really, the only person who beat him was the 16-year-old that qualified for the Olympics. It's the only person that's beat him. But so again, just explosiveness. Roydell is a big guy. Not as slow as what people think. And Cam Davis is another one. Those are your young guys. I mean, without Keziah Holmes, Jalen Lucas, there is a guy in there that you can just mix it up. And again, my bad, I didn't even bring up Toafili. But you've kind of got the ability to have that 1-2 punch. And even, again, when people wonder what the wide receivers are going to do, are they stepping it up? We've got the ability to go 21 personnel or 20 personnel, and you still don't lose a receiving threat. You can put Roydell or Keziah Holmes out there at the running back, and you put You put Toafili or Makai at that slot. Now you still have the ability to both run and pass.
Losing Wilson and Keon Coleman, obviously it's tough to replace two guys that were as productive as those two were for Florida State last year. Considering what you just said about the running back room and how you can mix and match personnel with the guys that are out there, you can split some guys out wide, stuff like that. I know there are some talented receivers still in the room, coming into the room, right, as transfers. My question for you is, do you think the offense looks schematically different just because of the personnel relative to last year? Do you think it's going to look about the same with just new faces? I mean, how do you feel that, I guess the changes both in the running back and wide receiver room that are, a lot of impact guys gone, how do you think it looks schematically, I guess, for the offense this year?
I think that maybe they try to make it not as complicated. They're, again, relying on the running game. But until your wide receivers get confidence, it's probably one of the most deepest skilled rooms, just with guys you've never heard of, make a play consistently outside of recruiting. So we know who Keem Williams is through recruiting. But like you said, we don't have Johnny Wilson. We don't have Keon Coleman. But I try to tell fans to think about this as, and go back to our show, and I think I've told you what I think Florida State was going to go both the last 2 years, and I've been spot on. But this is 2022. Nobody knew who Johnny Wilson got more career catches and receptions against Louisville in the 2022 season than he had his whole career. Nobody really knew who Trey Benson was. We just, except for the guys who covered it in the coaching staff. Right now, Malik Benson had some explosive plays at Alabama, but never really did anything. Never really saw the field. We see the potential. Can he do it in the ACC? Brown, same thing. Well, we know what Jalen Lucas did at Indiana. Again, he's a tweener. What can they do here? And on top of that, now there is who is the next Johnny Wilson? Who is the next Keon? Will Akeem Williams take it at that next step? Again, that's the worst P you could beat. Well, it's two P's that you could beat that you don't. But potential can either stand for, potential just means you ain't did shit yet. So that wide receiver room has a bunch of potential, which could not necessarily handicap, but it's going to make that passing game go a little slower in the first half of the season.
I mean, you lose some guys on the offensive line, but you bring in a lot of production out of the portal, too. It feels like this has an opportunity to be one of Mike Norvell's best units since he's gotten to Florida State, even though there has been some turnover there. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's some things to be wary of up front?
Nah, I think that's where Florida State's strength is on both sides. Is up front, is the line. I mean, I think they're an easy target, but when you look at it, they return, I think, top five. They're considered one of the top 5 units again, like they were last year. If nothing else in terms of production, but you don't have the offense, and I mean the amount of sacks that they gave up was pretty impressive considering you have a scrambling quarterback. I think this is the deepest that the offensive line has been. And, I think that the biggest thing for them that they haven't had in years including when one of the guys who now will be a rotational guy, Rob Scott, he had to start his freshman year because there were so many injuries. Like if they could just stay healthy, I think up front they're gonna handle stuff.
I mean, you lose Jared Verse. I mean, flipping over defensive side,
Yeah.
strength in the trenches. You lose Jared Verse, which Albany is churning out. I mean, apparently Albany's got another really good defensive end, defensive tackle, somebody else up front. They're just churning out guys at Albany that are just really good football players. What Jared Verse was to this team is really, really hard to replace. You're adding another Oregon State transfer with a name I can't pronounce. He was like second team All Pac-12. So you not only get DJU from Oregon State, you get Sione Loloia. Yeah, whatever.
Lolo,
We'll call him Lolo. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Very good player up front that you're adding there, a power conference transfer to replace a guy like Verse. I just feel like this is going to be another really good defensive line again, just with the way Florida State's recruited and how they've attacked the portal. Norvell's just been really good at adding impact guys where they've been deficient out of the portal. It's been a masterclass.
A lot of people say, all he does is rely on the portal. And he's like, I don't rely on the portal any more or less than anybody else. Our guys are just good.
Right.
And I think it comes from recruiting styles. As opposed to, this is the best player, or what everybody's telling me. Now, do they meet the measurables in what you need? And I think that's what the coaching staff has done a good job of. Jared Verse was everything that you want, and I'm gonna be honest with you. In your second DN,
right?
Like you want the passer, like he was able to. His ability in the run game was just as great as his ability to be able to rush the passer. And him and Braden Fisk being on the same side really caused a lot of havoc. And a lot of fans are like, a lot of rivals are like, there's no way you get Jared Verse. But I'm like, well, I mean, we did have a guy named Jermaine Johnson that came from Georgia that got the actual sacks that Jared Verse didn't get, whereas Jared Verse caused havoc. So why are FSU fans, and why should FSU fans be, well, we got a guy by the name of Marvin Jones Jr. who came from Georgia, who played the same position as Jermaine Johnson at Georgia, whose dad is arguably one of the best linebackers that have ever played college football. But you've got him, you return Patrick Payton, and while you did lose Braden Fisk, we also didn't have Darrell Jackson all last year, who looks crazy. Him and Farmer in that interior look crazy. And now your young guys like Kelvin Sampson have been having a pretty good camp. Lyons is kind of coming on board, and Grady as well, which the problem with Grady is everybody expected, white boy on D-line expected him to be Braden Fisk. Well, this guy's got 3 years. Braden Fisk was a senior coming in and getting active with us. So there are pieces there, and then I mentioned Patrick Payton, all ACC. Could have probably made all ACC as a corner with the amount of batted balls he had. That's why you should be. It's definitely the 2 deep rotation should be causing havoc, and that's not without me naming Lolo Duroger, who came from West Virginia, who can play both the 3 and the 5, so he can bump inside on the 4-3 scheme, bump back outside on the 3 down. Like the one place I've told people, if Fuller's all right with me, now, he gets a lot of crap, but that man's defense is with talent. You can always see where the guys wanted. The guys were in position to make a play early on, but they did. But once he started getting more talent around them, instead of just being in position to make a play, these guys are making plays. They're also probably, for the first time in his career, he's been able to get bailed out. Good players take you out of bad plays, man.
Yeah, you mentioned Adam Fuller. It made me think of the Mike Norvell thing we talked about after year 1, where it's like, all right, year 1 didn't go necessarily as well as fans were hoping, but you got to give him time. That was the one thing that you mentioned. Like after what happened with the Willie Taggart era, you got to give your guys some time. I feel like they've done that with Fuller. Defense looking really strong once again. You mentioned all the impact players up front. What they bring in at linebacker too, right? You bring in Cam Riley, which I feel like is a pretty significant transfer addition. Again, we're talking about another impact guy from a power conference team. You bring him in from Auburn. This is going to be still a good unit. You lose a couple guys in there, obviously, that were really talented, really impact players last year, but you're still bringing in talent. And Norvell, the point you made about Norvell and how he uses the portal, people saying it's an over-reliance on the portal. It's like, no, we have good players that are moving on. We got to plug in other good players to replace him while we're still developing guys underneath them. And this is just another example of that with the addition of Riley.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Riley is Riley probably gives you an advantage that you can't really just recruit that anywhere else. I mean, guy's tall, is like 6'5", is 240. He's basically a defensive end, a rush defensive end that's got the ability to cover the passer. So what happens when he drops back, it eliminates the quick game. You got a guy who can just extend. Who's, again, you've seen quarterbacks have to change the way they throw to get over him. So that helps your secondary. He's also pretty good on the blitz. But I think where we were, you add him, DJ Lundy, Sean Murphy's coming in and getting some stuff. Fans expected him to be Derrick Brooks day one. I don't know why, but he's a relatively young linebacker on top of the guys that are just still trying to develop. So I think you bring in some guys that have got reps. The minute people that's another one of those positions I think like the wide receiver group. It's the weaker on the defense, but there's a lot of talent there. And after they start making some plays, they'll get a little more confident in their abilities.
Defensive back room is loaded. Azaria Thomas, Fentrell Cypress. You add another impact transfer, right? This has been a theme. You add in Devontae Brown from UCF. You lose Renardo Green. That's tough to replace. But with the guys still in the room, what you're bringing in, I have trouble poking a lot of holes in the secondary.
Oh, yeah, and we run too deep, so which is a lot. This is why a lot of people weren't as scared. I mean, yeah, we know Renardo Green and we know what Jerry and Jones could do, but we've heard AZ and Fentrell Cypress' name all last year as well. Adding Shaheem Brown helps with your back end. Conrad Hussey, KJ Kirkland, your young recruits that you brought in last year were rotating in heavy last season. So you know what they can do. And so you've got the key to all of this. And what I always tell people, because I covered the NFL, what makes me confident is I know that there are guys back there with draft grades. So, for example, Shaheem Brown, AZ, Cypress, Jackson, Farmer, Peyton. If you want to throw Jones in there, but I doubt he leaves after this season. That's 7 guys just off the top of my head that could potentially be in Indianapolis. That could potentially be on somebody's roster. That's talent. And at the end of the day, you got to have Jimmys and Joes just as much as you need the X's and O's.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, it's just the way Norvell's recruiting, the way he's bringing in talent. It should make fans in Tallahassee very, very happy that they hung with him after the 3-6 and 5-7 start in consecutive years. Now you get back-to-back double-digit win seasons, and I feel like this has potential, obviously, to be another really, really good year for Florida State. Taking a look at the schedule now, I do think I've gone through a handful of these previews already, James, as we sit here recording on August 6th, and I do feel like that Florida State did get a tougher draw on the schedule compared to some of the teams I previewed so far. Like I'm looking at, I mean, this is not Georgia Tech's schedule by any means, but I mean some of the teams Florida State drew in year one of this like new ACC. You get SMU. You have to travel there. You do host Clemson, at Miami, at Notre Dame, home against Florida at the end of the year, of course. And I mean, Florida could be on a different coach by then. Who knows what the future holds with them. But I mean, with this, how the schedule's laid out, especially with the start to the year, having the week 0 game overseas in Ireland against Georgia Tech, obviously an interesting start to the year, and then coming back and playing Labor Day night against Boston College. It's a very weird schedule, I feel like, for Florida State in how they start in week 0, then having to play Monday night on Labor Day night, and then you get a bye week there going into, I guess, what's week 2 of the college football season. How do you think this schedule lays out for Florida State? Like, what's just your general feel on it in terms of how the draw kind of fell its way for the Seminoles?
I think it's harder based upon. I mean, it's a 3-game schedule. I think it might be a little easier than last year, and this is what I mean. Last year it was a 2-game season in the month of September.
Yeah.
So like you had LSU and Clemson in the same month.
Yeah.
Right now it's kind of spread out. You actually get an opportunity. Your season, and you're playing more notable games in October going into November. With shoot, what was I gonna say? Oh, you got this game against Georgia Tech is tough, but you still have more talent than them. SMU will be more difficult than what people think, but you have more talent than them. Memphis, I think you have games that are good enough to battle test your guys that you should be able to beat them with overwhelming talent. Memphis again was I think they won their conference, one of the top P5 schools. SMU was one of the top G5 schools. SMU was one of the top G5 schools last year. Now they're playing some different talent,
right.
But I think the draw, we didn't get Louisville, we didn't get NC State. Like if you had Louisville or NC State while you're having to play these other teams, I think that'd have been kind of rude. And the Notre Dame game is a game that matters but doesn't. We go in there, we win, it helps with our ranking, but it does absolutely nothing for what we have to do is so that we make sure we don't have to play that. We get that bye week. You got to win the conference.
Yep,
that's it. It's only 4 conferences right now. So you win your conference and they seed you based upon who's the highest rank in the new playoff.
Yeah, I mean, the Notre Dame game, I think, is purely for optics. Where it falls on the schedule and how Florida State looks in that game, I think will go a long way, to how fans perceive Florida State going into a playoff if the Seminoles put themselves in position where, okay, you win the ACC, and like you mentioned, you get that first round bye. I kind of glossed over that Memphis game. I mean, that's interesting for a lot of reasons, obviously, with Norvell's history there and the kind of team that they were last year. But like you said, I mean, overwhelming talent. You're coming off a bye week. Should be okay there. The 3-game season, in your opinion, is that SMU, Clemson, Notre Dame? Or is it another combination?
No, actually, I'm going to do something that I hate doing because they don't know how to act when you do it. Miami is still Miami to us. That's an important game. It's a lot that goes into it.
Yep.
It's Notre Dame, Clemson, and Miami. With no disrespect meant for SMU or Memphis, as I just said. I actually think those teams are good, but when I'm looking at, they just aren't better coached than us. But from a 247 and a rivals perspective, Miami has more talent than Florida State. So like they could wake up and just be like, you know what, bump our coaches, we're going to just win. But I think their coaches are a big part of their problem.
I agree with that. We can talk about Miami all we want, and then you get into a game against Georgia Tech and you don't take a knee, and that's not, it's easy to throw stones at them from the standpoint of like they were an easy target there if Cristobal hadn't already done it before at Oregon, right? So he had a history of doing something very similar.
But even bigger than that, like Hayes King hadn't completed 3 passes the whole game, and he completed 2 big ones. So it might have been 3, but 2 big ones.
Yep.
For guys just not doing their job, like getting greedy, wanting to be the hero. Like that comes down to that's culture. People want to just as much as people want to bat, and I get it. That is what culture is supposed to be. You got 13 guys decide they don't want to play in your bowl game. actually more. But okay, fine. Culture is I'm going to have two hands on the ball, even though I'm running this, and I'm close to getting over 100 yards, but I'm not going to be greedy. Nothing comes before the game.
Right.
Culture is, again, don't go for the interception in Hail Mary drill. Because what if you miss, somebody catches it, guy catches it, goes out of bounds, and then don't let nobody behind you. It's a lot of silly coaching cues, like not just coaching cues, but like things that you shouldn't have to tell. But, again, they are an easy target because they talk so much.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why.
They talk a lot, and then it's like not only like the culture thing, you kind of alluded to this, but it's just like fundamental football stuff they were screwing up. I mean, you mentioned just not letting a guy get behind you when you're playing essentially prevent defense. You're in like cover 5, cover 6. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're just letting guys run free through the secondary even after they failed to take a knee, right? So like you mentioned, it's just, it's crazy. Back to Florida State. I mean, I see this team, I see a few contenders to actually win the conference on paper. Florida State is obviously one of them. I still think Clemson with their talent is one of them. And then I think you can throw, if Miami, again, all things go right, which they never do on paper for the last 2 decades, but if all things went right on paper, they have a very talented team coming back. Those are my 3 teams where I'm like, I feel like they're, from a talent standpoint, head and shoulders above the rest. Like NC State's got a good team, Louisville's got a good team, Virginia Tech's got a good team, Georgia Tech's got a good team. From a talent standpoint, though, it's not comparable to what those 3 schools give you, right? And I feel like those are the 3 that are really the true contenders, where I feel like if they get in a conference title game, they're going to be overwhelming favorites over the field, right? Whereas if they play each other, I think it would be a very fun ACC title game. I look at this, and this feels like, even with a loss of talent and a loss of, I guess, production, we'll call it, because I don't think it's a loss of talent. I think Florida State really backfilled well here. But you get the loss of the production in the wide receiving core, in the running back room, in the quarterback room, obviously losing Jordan Travis, the guys you lose on defense. But I feel like they backfilled it all with effective, proven players at both the G5 and the Power, we'll still call it the Power 5 because they took it from Oregon State, a resident member of the Pac-12 conference still. This does feel like a team that could certainly win at least 10 games and be in the hunt to not only win the ACC, of course, but to get themselves into the college football playoff, which, because of circumstances kind of out of their control with the Travis injury, they weren't in there last year. I'd be surprised if this was anything worse than like 9-3, James. I feel like 9-3 is almost like a lot of stuff went wrong. Because I do like, even though it's a tougher schedule relative to some of the other teams I've previewed in the ACC so far, I do feel like Florida State's got an overwhelming amount of talent in a lot of these games, and I do feel like they're in better position to win these games just kind of because of how they fall on the schedule. I like how the schedule lays out in that way for Florida State. I think the toughest stretch is at SMU and then hosting Clemson. That's pretty tough, and then having at Miami, home against North Carolina, then going to Notre Dame is a tough little stretch, especially because Notre Dame is coming off of a bye going into that November 9th game, so they've had a couple weeks to prepare, so that's an interesting spot. But this feels like 10-2 at worst for Florida State, 9-3 if everything went wrong. I'm kind of curious on where you fall there.
That's exactly where I was at. I personally think they can go. I personally think they'll go 11-1. And I do think the floor is 10-2. And the one is me. I can't pick it for you. It's just when you have that many guys that haven't been around, that many moving pieces, that takes time to gel. And you got to have adversity in some capacity. So you also, I believe it's because of the teams we play. I don't think we'll have. Remember, at one point last year there were 3 undefeated ACC teams, and people were crying and saying, "Hey, what's going to happen when all 3 go undefeated?" Because they didn't play each other.
Right.
But I do believe if you lose one, you'll get an opportunity to bounce back in there to one of these teams. So, but I think 11-1. But if somebody said 9-3, I don't think they'd be trolling. But I think 10-2. Personally, think 10-2 at worst.
I mean, by the way, though, like Florida State goes 9-3, I think that probably includes a loss to Notre Dame, and I think 2 losses in conference still probably gets you into an ACC title game. And at that point, I don't
Look,
see a lot of teams going. I don't see a lot of teams going better than 6-2 in the ACC. James, just like looking at. I mean, I mentioned Florida State. I mentioned Clemson. I think Miami could be in that conversation. Maybe a school like Virginia Tech, because their schedule's so easy. Like, they have a very easy ACC schedule. They don't draw Louisville. They don't draw NC State. Their 2 games are Miami and Clemson. But even there, like, they got depth. I'm a Hokie. They got depth issues that I'm concerned about. They have some issues in the back end of the secondary at safety. I worry about their offensive line against good ACC fronts still. I just don't see a lot of teams going better than 6-2 in the ACC, and I think even in the worst case scenario for Florida State, I don't see them losing 3 conference games with how the schedule lays out.
no, I don't see that. But Notre Dame just lost the left tackle. I think Notre Dame in November, God knows what they could be. But again, it's just more so. It's not. It's more so trying to predict the unpredictable more than I would normally have to, because I really don't see them. I don't see anybody better than them, just better than them on the schedule. But I also know there's the human element that you have to take into account. So, but I mean, even if they go 9-3, FSU fans got to figure out, just realize where we were at. Like,
yeah,
you're
I agree.
still in a situation where I think 9-3 for a little while is the floor for Florida State's program as they move forward here on out. Like, you just gotta. Like, you're not. Mike is about as competent of a coach as you can get, and the reality is, if you have a competent coach, that's going to take you through over half of your games. Then you just got to have cats, and I think Florida State has both of those. But you brought up a good point, and this is where it's going to be fun to see fans' mindset change. The goal is to get to the playoffs. It's 12 teams right now. There's 4 guaranteed slots. The goal isn't to – you don't have to – and what people can say what they want to say, it's kind of taking away some of the effectiveness of the regular season.
Right.
This is covering NFL. Like, you don't live and die by every game you lose. Win your division, you get a bye.
Right.
And that's what a lot of teams aim for, is winning the division. So now I think this is going to change the way people consume and view college football.
No, I'm totally with you. There's a lot of things I don't love about the professionalization of college football, right? Like, I don't love that we're getting rid of entire conferences that have been like the fabric of the game for 60, 70 years. I obviously don't love that. There is going to be a level of competition. It's going to heat up with obviously these power conferences now. I think eventually, water kind of finds its level, and we'll probably get back to like, two super conferences, and there'll be divisions, and we'll do that regionally and call them conferences, and then we'll just be back to where we were at before. Like, that wouldn't shock me if that was kind of the iteration of what happens like 10, 15 years from now. But the way I look at this is, there are a handful of games on here where I think Florida State could be pushed a little bit. But I don't think there's a single team on the schedule. I mean, you mentioned Miami's got a lot of talent, but I don't think there's a single team on the schedule. We're looking at it here in August, where I don't think Florida State's going to go into the game as the favorite. I think they're going to be a favorite in, if not all 12 of these regular season games, at least 10 or 11 of them. And I think that's a really good spot to be, considering what Florida State has had to replace on both sides of the ball with all that talent gone to the NFL. I think this is obviously going to be a really competitive year for Florida State. I think Florida State needs to win the ACC just to be safe, because I don't know that, especially with the precedent that was set last year, I'm not sure, and this is also with Notre Dame, if Notre Dame's good and is like playoff good, I'm not sure after last year there's a scenario where the Big 12 or the ACC get 2 teams in. I think there's a scenario here, obviously, where the Big 10 and SEC get 3 to 4 teams in. If Notre Dame's good and they're in, this could be a scenario that plays out here where either the ACC or the Big 12 really only get their conference champion in. It's impossible to predict that now, James, but I think Florida State, just to be safe, they got to go out and win the conference, secure the bye, and not even have to worry about it, especially after what happened last year.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, now that's what I'm not looking forward to, is the chance. We could be undefeated. We could be undefeated, lose the ACC championship, and still not get a game. But I think, I think that's the whole key. Is just control what you can control, and it's supposed to work out. Didn't last year, but it's supposed to work out when you control what you can control.
You've been around this fan base long enough. What do you think the panic meter is if this team goes like let's call it worst case scenario, James, or let's even do this. Let's say Florida State goes 10-3, loses in the ACC championship game, right, and misses the playoff, and then they missed the playoff last year because of circumstances really outside of their control with the injury of Jordan Travis. How do fans perceive? Look, they're crazy fans in every fan base, right? Mm-hmm. How do fans perceive that kind of scenario playing out where Florida State had another really good year, replaced a lot of talent, like had a strong season, you lose in the title game, you miss the playoff again. How do fans perceive that in regard to Mike Norvell? Because like you said, I mean, he's raised the floor to where this is going to be a 9 or 10 win program for a while. And it's been since like early in the Jimbo Fisher era, since there's been really the expectation that this program was going to be that consistently.
Yeah, I think if that happens, there'll be obviously disappointment on the season, depending on how the losses happen.
Right.
But I think we'll accept a cool bowl game to go to. It'll be nothing else to do it. I mean, because again, I don't think we're in a situation where we believe 5-5 or 5-7 is just as good as 10-3. We're not that naive.
Right.
The key is, and what every fan should look at is, are we playing meaningful games in November? If you're playing which I mean, like, if we win this game, are we in? Do we have all you can ask for is the play-in, which is the conference championships. Does this game put us? Are we still competing for the play-in? And once you get in the play-in, you win and you're in. After that, you accept the fact that you're going to go to a really nice location, regardless, whether it be hosting the playoff game, or going to. I mean, I guess maybe even Jacksonville for the Gator Bowl or whatever bowls are still existent at this time.
Right.
But I think, there will be a bunch of people who are going to be like, oh, we'll never beat Georgia, without realizing that, Georgia was in the Orange Bowl last year too.
Right.
Players mess up. We just can't get over the top, like, worried about things.
Yeah, agree. One last question, quick one before we get you out of here. The stadium renovations to Doak Campbell, right? They've been underway since the end of last season. Where is that project at? I think that I saw there was going to be some like limited seating relative to what the stadium normally holds entering the year. Is that actually the case? If so, what do you think the impact is going to be as far as the home field advantage, if any?
It's going to be a lot quieter. You can't erase half your stadium, even if they put in bleacher seating. It's unfortunate, but it's a part of Florida State getting to where they need to get to. You have to be able to raise funds. It's about money. And, there's no other real way to like get around it. It's clearly about money. And those seats are already sold. So it's one season, 2025. That just makes people have to. And then the other part of it, a lot of people are going to complain about the ticket prices going up. But right now you're missing the fact that we're going to have, I think, 60,000 will be in the stadium as opposed to the 85. So when it gets back in 2025, get your booster tickets. It don't cost. It pans out. And if we're winning, sell the tickets that you don't want to use. You'll make your money back. You'll more than make your money back.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good call. I could envision fans being upset about that, but I mean, you got to pay for it somehow. James, appreciate it, buddy. Of course, got to let everybody know where you're at, where they can find all your stuff. Give you an opportunity to plug everything you got going on.
The biggest thing is at Den Media Group on not social media, on YouTube. Check me out. We do all kinds of giveaways. Every time we get over 1,000 subs, we give away $500 as well as $100, whatever. Excuse me. So the next mark will be 7,000. So we'll give away 500 to a random listener. We'll give away 200 to a member, and then we'll give the amount of likes to a member. But also we give away free tickets to Florida State games the Wednesday before home games. So you might want to tune in, listen, try to win something. So that's about it. At Den Media Group on YouTube.
James, appreciate it, man. We'll do it again soon. We'll try to get you on during the season if we get a good Florida State start, which we expect maybe before that Clemson game.
That'd be
in
awesome,
October,
man.
we'll see what you got going on.
Yep, hit me up.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, bro.
All right, we'll be back. More podcasts, more previews. We're rolling through them. Early August. Joey will be back soon, thankfully, so I'm not steering the ship by myself. We'll keep it rolling through the season previews until he's back. Check out the youtube.com/@the-ACC Football Podcast. Follow us at BC Podcast ACC. You know where we're at on audio as well. Until next time, go ACC.